So this is part 1 of the 3rd lecture on pediatrics, and we're going to look at safety, maltreatment, congenital heart defects, fractures, and then a few neurosensory disorders. So how do kids die? Well, the leading cause of death for children over a year is motor vehicle accidents. After that, we have things like drowning, burns, poisoning, and firearms. But pretty much for every age group over a year, it's motor vehicle accidents. This can be from things like a child imitating the parent and actually getting the car turned on, or being in an accident and not properly restrained, or being hit by a car. And when kids get hit by a car, you typically get an injury on one side, and then they get thrown, and so you get a head injury on the opposite side. And kids are notorious for running out, darting out, right? And the driver can't see them till they're right in front of the car because you don't see them coming out between parked cars because of their height. So other safety issues, plug covers so that little fingers don't explore. Kids, particularly toddlers and early preschoolers, don't necessarily realize that because they got hurt putting a hairpin or whatever into one plug, that another one would do the same thing. So they haven't necessarily learned that, so sometimes they'll keep doing stuff. Drowning's just awful. It does not take a lot of water for a child to drown. They can drown in just a few inches of water, so they should never be left alone. They can drown in a toilet, a bucket, most anything. Burns it just takes a moment of inattention here for a kid to grab. It's also important to put handles back so a child who's reaching up to see what's going on doesn't pull hot liquid down on themselves. Firearms are also a common cause of death. Kids see them used in whatever, video games, cartoons. They don't really realize it's going to kill somebody. At least young children don't. So these are usually accidental, so don't leave a loaded gun. If you have children in the house, keep guns unloaded. Poisoning. Kids don't try and eat medicine. They think it looks like candy or it looks like something else. They don't have young children don't have very developed taste buds, so they don't necessarily realize, oh, this isn't candy. So things that look good, they assume are going to be candy. So child-proof lids, keeping them in a cupboard up high, and a locked cupboard. And the same thing with chemicals. A locked cupboard up high where children aren't going to be able to get into them. And again, kids aren't necessarily trying to drink cleaning fluid. They don't realize what it is. And so keeping it in the original bottle is better than putting it in something else that may, especially if you put it in a cup or something, that may look like something the child thinks is for drinking. That's usually how ingestions of liquids happen, is they assume it was something to drink. So keep it in the original container and up high in a locked cupboard. And bags, suffocation is a problem with infants, so no bags should be near them. And in fact, in the crib, we recommend nothing. They should be on a nice firm mattress and just in a sleeper, the footy sleepers. No pillow, no blanket for those infants, and no bumper pads or anything that they can get tangled up in. Car seats. We want kids in car seats anymore until they're or car seat or booster seat until they're 4 feet 9 inches tall. This can be anywhere from 8 to 12 years of age. So the laws vary a little bit from state to state, but generally the recommendation is an infant must be rear facing in the rear seat. Rear facing is the safest. So when they outgrow that infant car seat, most of the other car seats, they call them convertible car seats because they can rear face or forward face. We want to keep them rear facing until they're a couple years old. Even if their legs are a little bit scrunched up, they're okay. They're safer rear facing. And then when they really don't fit rear facing anymore, or they're out of the weight for that car seat, they can move to a booster seat. In California, they must be 4 years and 40 pounds in order to move from a car seat to a booster seat. That's not or, they must be both. Both over 4 years old and more than 40 pounds. And then that booster seat until 4'9" so that the seatbelt fits them well. So that it's not coming across their face or, fitting funny. Child maltreatment. This can be neglect, abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. So types of neglect are physical neglect or emotional neglect. So physical neglect is not giving the child the things they physically need, like food, clothing, shelter, supervision, medical care, education. Emotional neglect is a lack of affection and attention and emotional nurturance. Types of abuse, our definition for this, physical abuse is deliberate infliction of physical injury on a child. Emotional, it's deliberately destroying or impairing a child's self-esteem or competence. And then sexual abuse is use, persuasion, or coercion of child to engage in sexually explicit conduct. So you are a mandated reporter for child abuse. What does that mean? It means you must report any reasonably suspicious incident that is reasonably suspicious for abuse. It does not mean you have to prove that there was abuse. You shouldn't. You need to report it and let CPS do the investigation. If you report and it turns out it was nothing, you're protected by the Good Samaritan laws. You can't get in trouble for having reported something that was reasonable to report. You can get in trouble for not reporting. You can be fined, and they even say that could lead to imprisonment. So how do you make this report? Well, you're supposed to make a phone call as soon as is reasonably possible. So if the child's not safe, you don't have to leave them in that unsafe situation to go make the phone call. Make sure they're safe and then make the phone call and then follow up within 36 hours. And when you make that phone call, they'll tell you certain things that, my name is this, you're going to put this on the form. You're going to need this information to put on the form. So this is the website where those forms are. Another abuse situation is shaken baby syndrome. And most of the time, this is a baby who's crying and crying, and the parent just loses it and shakes them. The problem is a baby's head is very big and heavy, and their neck muscles are weak, so their head really does flip-flop, and their brain inside is banging against the skull, and it's stretching and pulling and tearing little blood vessels. So that's what we're going to see. We're going to see these little areas of infarct from the torn blood vessels and retinal hemorrhages. And here's a picture of retinal hemorrhages. There is very little else other than shaken baby syndrome that causes these retinal hemorrhages. A child who has a trauma to the eye is going to be one big area of bleeding. So this is really indicative of shaken baby syndrome. And then especially the parent will tell you a story that just doesn't go with the injuries at all. They fell from, the couch onto carpeted floor, something like that. Munchausen syndrome by proxy. This is the parent who makes up medical problems for their child. So they exaggerate or fabricate signs and symptoms of an illness in their child. So that's the child is the proxy. And the parent is doing that for the parent's own whatever, attention, gratification. These kids can go through a lot of needless, painful procedures, And unfortunately, in about 10% of the cases, the child dies. The parent takes things a little bit too far to make it look reasonable for them to take the child into the hospital or have the procedures done. So what are factors that predispose a child for abuse? In the parent, being a teen mom, being a single parent, having an unrelated partner. So often the abuser is, mom's boyfriend or whatever. Somebody's not actually related to the child. And if you think of these are just people with more stress and potentially less coping skills, right? That single parent teen mom. The parent has low self-esteem, poor knowledge of parenting, and was abused as a child themselves. So this feels normal to them. They don't have any other way to deal with it. They don't know what else to do. What child is most likely to be abused? Well, a child under 1 year or with a disability. So physically disabled, hyperactive, premature, something outside of the norm. And then environmental characteristics that play into it. So this is a parent who is socially isolated. They don't have a support system. So poor support system. If you add in chronic stress, poverty, things like homelessness, chronic illnesses, that all plays into it, and substitute caregivers as well make it more likely to happen. Sexual abuse, this can be rape or molestation, prostitution, incest with the child, exhibitionism, so exposing oneself to the child pornography or prostitution, so putting the child into that, or pedophilia, attraction to children, physical attraction. So who are our sexual abusers? The most common is a man who knows the victim, but it can be anyone, so don't rule out anyone else. It happens in all socioeconomic brackets. 80% of the time, it's an adult who's doing this to the child, rather than, another child or a teen. And remember, most likely they know the child, so they're able to pressure the child into not telling. Don't tell because you'll get in trouble or you'll get taken away from your parents. And unfortunately, we do see this being generational sometimes. The parent was abused and sexually abused, and they sexually abuse their child. Okay, moving on to congenital hearts. We'll just talk about a few of them. This is kind of not the exact thing we're going to use as we look at them, but just to remember, right atria, right ventricle, left atria, left ventricle. The right side of the heart goes up the pulmonary artery and to the lungs. So right and left. And then it comes back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, down to the left ventricle, and up through, this is behind here, the aorta, and then out to the body and up to the head and arms. So congenital heart defects, that's what we usually term it. You'll also see it called congenital heart disease because most of these defects, even after they're surgically repaired, the child has long-term sequelae from it, or they need ongoing treatment. So then they'll call it congenital heart disease. So either one, they're both CHD. So about 5 to 8 per 1,000 live births have something wrong with the heart, but only 2 or 3 of them are going to be symptomatic in that first year of life. Congenital heart defects are a major cause of death in the first year, prematurity being the main one, and then it comes after that. The most common one we see is a ventricular septal defect, so an opening in the septum, the division between the right and the left ventricles. And a quarter of the kids approximately who have a heart defect have something else, some other anomaly going on with them. It's often part of a syndrome.